do want to thank you. Today we're talking about rest. What's interesting in Scripture is as the Bible talks about rest, as God upholds it, you'll start to realize a lot of Scripture actually talks about the importance of rest. What's so interesting is the Bible commands it. You and I, we want it. We want rest. If God commands it and we want it, why do we have such a difficult time resting? Why do we actually have such a difficult time being in that place of peace and rest? Here in Korea, there are a lot of different obstacles that you have. In 2012, BBC put out a report, and they did a survey with many nations engaging how many hours that they work a year. Italy and Germany comes in at the low end of their work, where they work about 1,408 hours a year. So that comes out to about, if you break it down into a 5-day work week, about 6.8 hours a day. 6.8 hours a day. Sounds good, right? Australia works a little bit more. They work about 1,599 hours, which ends up averaging about 7.6 hours a day. The UK comes in at 1,647 hours, averaging about 7.8. So Italy, Germany was 6.8, Australia 7.6, UK 7.8. The US comes in at 1,695 hours, which ends up about 8.8 hours a day. So where do you think Korea falls? More or less? If Italy's down here and Germany's down here, Korea is up here, working 2,193 hours, which averages out to about 9 hours and 45 minutes a day. In the study, I found out Norway, they allow about 70 days of vacation a year for their corporations. As I was praying, I thought we should plant a church in Norway, and I will head that up. But that's the reality that we live in. God commands work, we value, or God commands rest, so we value rest. We want to be people in a rested state in our hearts. But why is it that we actually can't get to that place of rest, especially today because of technology, because of computers, because of what's sitting in your hand right now or in your pocket? It's because of that device. Work is everywhere now, right? We used to live in a day, right, back in the day, right, where when we would go to work, we actually went to a place where that's the only place you can work. And so when you left that facility, you actually left work. So regardless of the pressure that you had to perform or continue to work, if you left that place, you couldn't work anymore. But right now, you can get a phone call from your business, and you have to do this. Because we live in a day where, because technology is everywhere, work is everywhere. And because of that, we're in a constant state of challenge of trying to find this place of rest. But even with that, even if we were to take away the hours, the place, the facilities, you also know just going on a good vacation doesn't necessarily mean you've rested. Because so often when you go on to that place of vacation, on the way back, you may have found some rest there, but coming back to your workplace, coming back home, when you open up that door, there's also that sense of, I didn't really get to rest. You want a vacation from your vacation. Just one good night of sleep, you don't find rest. The Bible commands rest. We want rest, but why is it that as we strive to find rest, we can't find rest? Judith Shulevitz, in a New York Times article titled Bring Back the Sabbath, it's a very well-written article. She has a Jewish background, and she talks about rest and the challenges of finding rest in this article. Let me read it for us. Most people mistakenly believe that all you have to do to stop working is not work. The inventors of the Sabbath understood that it was a much more complicated undertaking. You cannot casually downshift to find rest, that you might slip into bed at the end of a long day. What she's saying is it's not as if you simply stop working that you find rest. You don't casually downshift in life and you find rest. Open up your Bibles to Luke. Luke 6 is where we're at. And I do want to help us see how the Bible talks about rest and how much you deeply need it. I want to talk about 3 ways that we actually find rest. But before we do that, I actually want to have you fully understand that you need rest. Deep in your hearts, you need rest. Luke 6, 1 to 11. And Luke will give us 2 stories back to back that probably happened on 2 separate Sabbath days. But he'll give us 2 stories. And let me just read the full account to you so that we can fully understand. Luke has an agenda here. He wants to talk about the Sabbath, how important it is, but the challenges of actually finding Sabbath rest. Luke 6, verse 1. On a Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and also gave it to those with him. And he said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, this is the second story, he entered the synagogue and was teaching. A man was there whose right hand was withered, and the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they may find a reason to accuse him. But he knew their thoughts, and he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come and stand here." And he arose and stood there, and Jesus said to them, "I ask you." So this is not the scribes asking the question. Now it's Jesus asking the question because he knows their hearts. "I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good and to do harm, to save life or to destroy it?" And after looking around at them, he said to him, "Stretch out your hand," and he did so, and his hand was restored. And they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. So 2 accounts Luke gives to us about the Sabbath, the importance of rest. Jesus wants to honor the Sabbath. These other men, scribes and Pharisees, they also want to honor the Sabbath, but in it, as they try to honor the Sabbath, they actually have a conflict. But before we address the conflict, I want to show you the reason that they actually have a conflict is because they actually want to uphold rest. Jesus upholds the Sabbath. He upholds rest. The scribes, they also uphold rest. And that's the first thing that we must realize. The Bible, God himself, will tell you over and over and over, you have to learn to rest. It's actually one of the 10 commandments. Exodus 20, 8 to 11. It's on the screen. Remember the Sabbath days. This is one of the 10 commandments that God has. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on it you shall not do any work, and now listen to the list. This is the one of the first verses that it actually spells out in detail what this will look like in greater measure than the ones before. On it, you shall not do any work, you or your son, and then it actually includes the female or your daughter, and then it goes on your male servant and your female servant, or, and get this, your livestock, your sheep, your animals. Or the sojourner who may be among them, who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made Do you see this? It actually lists it out. You and your son, daughter, male servant, female servant. It lists it out saying you need to rest. But then it goes a bit further. You need to rest, but your dog also needs to rest. Right? It goes out of its way to mention the animal. You and your dog need to rest. Tell your neighbor, you and your dog need to rest. You and your dog need to rest. I mean, just try to comprehend. This is the extent in which God is telling you you need to rest. But not just you, not just your child, not just the worker that lives with you, not just even that sojourner who's living with you. It actually mentions that sojourner, but then also the animals. 3 chapters later, it goes into extensive detail what this rest looks like. See, God is upholding rest. And this, you may never really have seen this, but it talks about, again, the animals that need to rest, because it's only when they rest they can be restored, be given life, so that through themselves they can also give life to others. But then it talks about the land. The land needs to rest. God created you, God created animals, God created the world to rest. And you have to embrace that. Rest leads to life, and restlessness will lead to death. Amy Morin, another writer for Forbes magazine, talks about the addiction of the century and it being workaholism, to be a workaholic. And she says this in her article. The addiction to work can increase health risks and even contribute to premature death. Simply the idea of you being so committed to your work, you may leave that facility, that structure, but you don't actually leave that state of work. And because of that, it leads to what she's saying is actually physical death. Anxiety rises. You have a greater risk for different health issues. And through it, what Scripture is very clear about is you are people created for rest. No matter how strong you may think you are, you need rest. You ever go a night without sleep? You ever go nights without sleep? What happens to you? You turn into this beast, right? You turn into this person. You do things, think things, say things you would never think you would do. What's happening? Physically, you need to rest. When you don't let yourself rest, death creeps in. Misery creeps in. One of the forms of torture in countries is to deprive them of sleep. Physically, you need rest. But like I said before, you can have physical rest, but also in your heart, you need that deep spiritual rest. And just as physically, if you're not able to sleep, you're led to physical misery. In your heart, if you don't find rest, you'll be led to inner misery. You need rest. Your dog needs rest. Tell your neighbor one more time, you and your dog need rest. All right, so now we want to talk about 3 ways that we actually get there. How do we get this rest? By the way, you are you and the dog is not you, okay? It's no insult there, okay? But with that, 3 ways that we can learn how to rest. True rest demands true work. True rest demands true work. Let's go back to this passage. I want you to see the importance of this. So Jesus is honoring the Sabbath. And in it, the Pharisees have something against Jesus. And in verse 2 it says, why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath? So in there, they have a tradition, you should not harvest grain on the Sabbath. And so for these disciples, as they're walking by and they see the grain, the wheat, with their hand, they simply grab it and they're basically harvesting in one sense. This is what the Pharisees are thinking. They're harvesting and they're eating it. And in it, the Pharisees are thinking, you're doing work. You should not work. And so this is how Jesus responds. It's an obscure passage. And this is why Jesus is Jesus. In verse 3, Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry?" This is King David. When he was hungry, he and those who were with him, he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those with him. Now, see, that phrase right there, it's problematic. And I want to tell you why it's problematic. Because what Jesus is doing is, one, he's either reinterpreting the story, or he's actually interpreting it how it should have been interpreted, but it wasn't interpreted properly at that time. And we'll get to what that issue is in a moment. But actually, after he mentions this interpretation of the story, he doesn't give the people time to respond. So he shares a story about David, and then what does he say right after that? And he said to them, "The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." That's simply how he says something very controversial, doesn't let them respond, and then he says, "But the Son of Man, Jesus, is the Lord of the Sabbath." If Jesus was present today, let me try to get my present day mojo swag going. This is how I think Jesus would say it. You see, I'm not just for the Sabbath. I'm not just for rest. I think he would say, "Son, I created the Sabbath." That's what he's saying. Don't you know? I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Son, I got it. This is what I did. I created the Sabbath. So he reinterprets it, and then he says, "This is true because I say so, because I created." That's what Jesus is doing. I created the Sabbath. And that's what happens when you see in creation, God creates the world in 6 days, and on the seventh, he rested. Did God need to rest? No. But he chose to rest. And he would use that for eternity on end to demonstrate this is how you need to live. God goes out of his way from the very beginning of creation saying work is important, but then learn to rest. When God does this, you start to realize that he is the one that created work, and he is the one that created rest. And for God, when he works, there's two acts, there's two ways in which we need to understand the importance of work. I said true rest demands true work. You cannot truly rest unless you're truly working, that you have truly worked. And for God, there was two aspects of it. There was accomplishment. God finished his work. There was a finality to the work, but there's also fulfillment. And with your job, there has to be both senses. And every job has this. Every job has this, a sense of accomplishment that you've done something. But not only that, not only is there a finality to it, but there's a fulfillment aspect to it. When God does this, when God creates, what does he do? He creates creation, and on the seventh day he rested. And he models for people, this is what it should look like. So in the beginning of each day, he creates. And what does he say at the end of each creation day? It is good. And there's a finality to that day. And then the next day, he reveals to us that there is a sense of you begin work and you finish work. One of the reasons I think we can't stop working is within our days, there's no finality. There's no end. But that project is still ongoing. The demands are still there. So when you go home, you're not fully present with your family because you're thinking about the things that you have to accomplish. But for God, I think it was very clear. Each day he had an agenda, he had a goal, he saw it was good. And then the next morning he went back to work. There was a sense of accomplishment. And at the end of the week he rests because he's accomplished his mission. You have to see that each day and each week that there is a sense of you have to finish something. And if you don't ever feel like you've finished, you won't be able to rest. But also the other aspect of it is not only does there need to be a sense of accomplishment, but also a sense of fulfillment. When you see this, for God, when he's creating, there is a sense of purpose. Because he's creating for something. He's going to create man to inhabit the place. So he has a purpose for it. And then what does he create Adam to be? The first occupation that God, in one sense, creates is Adam to be maybe a gardener. Right? A gardener is one who would cultivate the earth and use it for good. So if you think about Adam, what he would do is he would harvest. He would do this work. But then there's one day fulfillment. There's fruit that is born. And you can appreciate that. For God, each day he said it was good after he finished. For Adam, when the fruit was born, he saw that it was good. And for you, you must be able to see in your work there is a purpose. Teachers understand this. You're not just educating, but you're building and shaping a generation. Just think about all the teachers that you know in Korea. Half of you guys are teachers. Just imagine, just even for us, how many people does gospel study represent in terms of the people that you teach? Some of you teach 5 students, others 20. Others, you have many throughout the week. Just imagine the kind of impact that you make as you pour into a generation. Think about all the other teachers that pour into a generation. You're not just educating for a day. You're not just entertaining for a day. You're shaping and building a generation. Carpenters, they're not just nailing nails, they're building homes. Right? Parents, they're not just disciplining kids, they're shaping who that kid will be in the future. Every business has a purpose to it. A cleaning lady has a service. If we didn't have cleaning ladies, cleaning people, then we wouldn't have a facility that's clean. If that barista did not work at Starbucks, you would not get your coffee, right? If that waiter did not work at that restaurant, if that chef did not work in that place, you would not get this is how God actually ordained it. So in your work, there is a fulfillment to be had. And you have to be able to accomplish that to find that fulfillment. But now it gets hard, because in this modern day and age, what we lack is the sense of fulfillment. Never in the generations previously have you had as many options for work. Never. If your parents were a baker, you became a baker. If your parents were shoemakers, you became a shoemaker. And this is how the world worked. But in it, as you built that shoe or whatever you did, and as you gave it to someone, you saw that sense of fulfillment. As I make this shoe, I serve this family, I serve that person. As I bake this bread, and I give it there's a sense of fulfillment. I'm doing something. But today, because of technology and because of companies, we don't get that sense of fulfillment. I love to preach. It's something that when I started doing early on, I really started to enjoy. And coming out to Korea and working for a church called Onuri, they have a ministry. It's an online daily devotional. And it reaches about 170-some countries, reaching thousands of people. And so when this opportunity for me to record with them was given to me, I was excited. And I was like, I get to have this platform to share God's word and to be an encouragement. I remember the first day, going into basically what they would do is you would record in someone's home, and you would have the camera, the lighting, and you feel like something big, right? Because you feel like you're on screen. And you do this, you record 4 in one day, and every month you would do that. And so in the beginning, I was ecstatic. This platform that I have, I get to influence people. But what quickly happened was those recordings became the bane of my existence. I did not enjoy that at all. And I thought about why. I love to talk, I love to preach, I love to share, but in that ministry, I did not. I started to despise it. And so I would go online and see how many people click on it. And I would see a lot of people are clicking on these videos all around the world. Christians in closed countries would use this to get spiritually fed. So in my mind, I was wrestled with, why is it that I start to despise this? And then one day, I got an email from someone. Oh, I heard what you shared, and I was just really encouraged. I really needed it. It was at that moment I realized why I was doing this. It was a sense of fulfillment. We hired an admin back in that church. He was in China, And he was actually going through a very difficult time, contemplating suicide. And the way in which he found out about this church, he went to that church, and as he was listening to the preacher, he was saying, "Hey, I know that guy." And then the worship leader would come up, "Oh, I know that guy." And then the presider, one of the pastors, would come up, "I know that guy." And then the actual preacher would come, "I know that." And he realized these were all the people that he would be fed from spiritually when he was in China. And he shared that testimony to us. And it was in that moment I was reminded there was a sense of fulfillment. This is why I do what I do. One of the reasons you find so much challenge in your workplace is you forget, what am I doing all of this for? 2 practical applications for this that I want to give to you. In your workplace, for many of you, it's simply an office. You're simply crunching numbers. There seems to be no purpose to it. My encouragement to you is find a way to serve someone in your workplace. And through it, there will be a sense of fulfillment. I wish we can just change the ways in which we do work today so that we can actually see how other people are being benefited. But in it, we can't necessarily do that. So my encouragement to you is one small practical way is in your work, find a way to actually serve people. But 2, we're created for relationship. We're created for this. So my encouragement to you is if you can't do that in your workplace, find a way in which you can serve someone and help them in such a way that you know what you're doing matters. Whether it's a church, whether it's an NGO, whether it's simply helping a friend, go out of your way to serve them. But the 3rd way that I would want to encourage you to do this is show your appreciation when you are served. When you're at that restaurant, tell the waiter, thank you, encourage them. Go out of your way to tell the chef that you appreciate them. Small group leaders, people in ministry, teachers, how encouraged are you when a parent really goes out of their way to say thank you? Thank you for investing in my child. In that moment, you're reminded how important it is. True rest demands true work. And you have to be able to see that sense of accomplishment, but also that sense of fulfillment. That you're actually doing this and it matters to people. And it's in that place you can actually take a step back, lie your head at the end of that day, and know that that day mattered. You served and blessed people. 2nd, true rest demands true trust. True rest demands true trust. Why do you work? You work, for many of you, simply because you need money. You need finances. And it's this perpetual state that we live in. I work to gain money, to provide for myself, to provide for my family. This is kind of the way in which we've done life. But in this, I want you to see for them, for these disciples, when Jesus responds by saying David violated the Sabbath, in it, what Jesus is saying is, although he violated the Sabbath, he didn't actually break the rules. Because what the Sabbath is ultimately for, it's for rest. And for these people, for David and his people, they needed food. So for that moment, it was okay because they needed to survive. And then God responds with this by saying, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I'm not just for us. I created rest. I'm the one that ultimately gives rest. And so when you think about the Old Testament, the reason in which we don't do some of the things that the Old Testament did is because ultimately Jesus is Lord of all. Meaning, 1, he's Lord of the Sabbath. And so the way in which they honored the Sabbath and found rest, Jesus fulfills that, and we find our rest in him. The reason we don't sacrifice animals as we used to is because Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. There is no more sin to be atoned for because Jesus' blood pays for it all. There is no more temple because Jesus is the ultimate temple. And that's why in this passage, when Jesus says, David, yes, he broke it. He broke the Sabbath rule, but ultimately he was finding life. And then Jesus says, I am the Lord of the harvest. I am the place where you find rest. And then for the disciples, when they were walking around to, in one sense, harvest grain for themselves, what's interesting to note is the food that's given to the disciples, the food that's given even to David and his people, was ultimately given not in a supernatural way, but someone baked that bread. And someone harvested that grain. And it was actually Old Testament law that you don't harvest your whole plot of land. But it's actually Old Testament law on the outskirts of your land, leave it unharvested so that the sojourner, these disciples in this time, can walk by and grab some food. And then Jesus is saying, I am the ultimate rest. What you'll see here is the only way that you can truly understand and find rest is when you truly understand what work is and how you find rest. God provided food for the disciples. It's in that place, they should be able to find that place of rest. The only way that you can truly rest and not worry about your work, and not worry if you'll get paid, and not worry if you'll ever be good enough to make sure you have job security forever, the only way that you can understand and find that kind of rest is when you also understand God created work and God has provided for you. When you can understand God provided for you yesterday, is how you can have faith to rest today that God will provide for you today. The only way that you can rest for tomorrow is when you understand today God provided everything that I needed. The job that I have was provided for me. Just as that harvest was provided, just as the bread was provided, your job is provided for you. And once you can comprehend God has provided for me, that's the place you can take a step back and realize you're not God. You don't have to demand to work in such a way that you feel like you can't stop. Rest comes to you only when you understand that God created rest, but then God created work. The Israelites, they struggled with this. Exodus 16. Let me just read this passage to you. It talks about manna and the food that God was giving to them. And as God was giving to them the food that they needed every day, they didn't comprehend that the food that they were eating was given from God. And because they didn't understand the food that they were getting was given from God, they always went out of their own way to find food. Exodus 16, 27, chapter 16, verse 27. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. This is on the Sabbath day. They went out to gather, but they found none. They found no manna. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse? You see that word? How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. I'm giving you rest. You should rest because I'm giving you what you need. Therefore, on the sixth day, you give your bread. He gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in this place. Let no one go out of this place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. You can only rest on the seventh day when you realize that God has given you what you needed on the sixth day. When you realize God gives to you what you have, that's the moment that you can rest. God created rest, but also God created work. God has provided for you in that job, in that place, and that's how you know you can rest. There will be seasons in life where you'll have to work more. Church planting, you have to work more. If you want to become a doctor, you have to be a resident, you have to work more. When you start a business, you have to work more. There'll be seasons of that. But man is not created for the Sabbath. Sabbath is created for man. In it, when you find rest, you find this biblical rhythm. That's where you find life. Lastly, deep rest demands deep security. Before it was true rest, now we're talking about deep rest. And we're going to end here. Why do you work? One of the reasons is you want to provide for your family. But once you understand that God provides for your family, that's when you can take a step back and rest, because you know God will provide for your family. You just need to simply obey Him. But one of the other reasons we work is because we're called to do it. It's actually a God-ordained thing that God has created work, and for us to find our purpose in it and to live it out. But it's important that we don't find simply our purpose. We find our purpose in work, but not our identity. And this is one of the other reasons we will never find true rest in work. You're called to it. There's a purpose, but never should you find your identity. I talked about Judith Shulevitz, the author of an article that was put in the New York Times. And she says this, and it's very insightful. When Sunday was still sacred, not only did drudgery give way to festivity, family gatherings, and occasional worship, but the machinery of self-censorship shut down, stilling the eternal inner murmur of self-reproach. What it's saying is when you took that day, took that Sabbath, and you rested, what happened is your heart stopped. It rested. The eternal inner murmur of self-reproach, the mind always working, the heart always working to check out, is everything all right? Or is the people that you're worried about, the opinions, the business, all of that ends on that day when you are able to take a step back and observe the Sabbath. Why is it that it's an eternal inner murmur? Legally Blonde. Many of you know the movie. Elle Woods. This is what happens when you ask your wife for a sermon illustration. You get a Legally Blonde illustration. In this movie, many of you have seen it. Elle Woods goes to Harvard Law because she wants to win her boyfriend back. As she wants to win her boyfriend back, she quickly becomes the object of scorn and ridicule. And so in the scene, in the movie, she goes into a party, and she was told that it's a costume party. So she dresses up in a costume, but no one else is dressed up in a costume. And so now there's this ridicule, disrespect, shame that she experiences. And then as she leaves the party, she says this, I'll show you how valuable Elle Woods can be. Later on in the movie, you see her continuing to work and learn and being a good law student. And then there's this internship that's provided by the professor. And then her name is listed on there. She got in. In one sense, she's made it. She's shown everybody. So what does she say when she's finally made it? She turns around to her ex-boyfriend, who now she despises, and she simply says this. She says, me. I've made it. This is the reason we cannot stop working. It's about me. It's about my purpose. But not just that, it's my identity. Everything that I am about is encompassed in it. I'll show you, as Elle Woods would say. I think for us, this is actually the reason we can't stop working. We need to continue to prove ourselves. We find our identity in this place. But the reason it's an eternal murmur, the reason it'll be unending, is once you prove it to one group and you get promoted, there will be that sense you have to prove it again. You have to prove it again. You have to prove it again. You buy that car, you now fit into society, but that car gets a dent. You have to prove it again. If you climb up that social ladder, you have to prove it again. Buy a nicer car. That's why it's unending. You see, deep rest will only come when you find deep security. In the Old Testament, as sin is unleashed, and as Cain and Abel are now found to be sinful, Cain kills his brother. Just one generation after Adam, Cain kills his brother. And if you know the story, you know what happens. As Cain kills his brother, God now approaches him. And then Cain says this to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. And then this is what he says. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Elle Woods, she wanted to find that place. I'll show you. She wanted to belong. She wanted to find a home. Cain was a wanderer. She never found where she belonged. And when God says, I, the Son of Man, is the Lord of the Sabbath, what he is finally then saying is, I will give you rest. But not only will I give you rest, I will provide rest when you find me. Not only will I provide for you, I will give you the status that you want. When you want to show the world who you are, I will tell them who you are. You are my son, you are my daughter. When you trust in me, your sins are wiped away. I give you my righteousness. He is the Lord of the Sabbath because he alone can give you true, deep, eternal rest. The curse of sin is restlessness. You will be restless forever. You'll be in that perpetual state of trying to prove yourself. I'll show you, I'll show you, I'll show you. The blessing of the gospel is they can finally rest. You know your worth. 6 quick tips as you head off to summer break, as you want to really find rest. 6 quick tips. 1, enjoy God. Enjoy, not just meet him, not just read the Bible, not just pray, enjoy him. Because it's when you enjoy him, when you know him deep in your heart, you find rest. Because that's where you belong. Worship him. 2, enjoy God's gifts. God said after each workday, it was good, it was good. On the day that he rested, he was enjoying creation. Enjoy God's gift. Take a vacation, enjoy it. Leisure activities, enjoy it. Use your body to get out there, to be active. Enjoy the body God has given you. Use your mind to read. Thank the Lord as you do. I encourage you, for some of you, you're so blessed, but you don't know it. Simply take the time that morning. Say to God what you're thankful for. 3, trust God. God will provide. Take a break. You're not God. God will provide. Take a break. Trust God. 4, enjoy people. Be in community. The people that God has given you are ways in which you are meant to find rest. Enjoy people. But 2, serve people. Don't just enjoy, serve them. They will find rest in doing it, but you'll also find rest in doing it. And 6, make it regular. It should be a rhythm. Whether it's Sunday, whether it's a different day, it should be regular. For God, it was regular. And he demonstrated it in the week. I encourage you to find a regular Sabbath and find regular rest. Let's pray.